The police station in rural Missouri was quiet just after midnight, the kind of quiet that made every ticking clock echo like a gunshot. Officer Daniel Ruiz sat hunched over his desk, the fluorescent light above flickering intermittently. His pen scratched across a stack of incident reports, the monotonous task usually soothing after the chaos of daytime calls. Tonight, though, a heavy tension hung in the air, an almost imperceptible feeling that something was about to disrupt the stillness. The hum of the air conditioning buzzed in the background, mingling with the faint sound of crickets outside, their chirps cutting through the darkness like tiny alarms. Ruiz rubbed his eyes and leaned back in his chair, trying to shake the feeling off. Just as he reached for his coffee cup, a sharp, metallic clang echoed through the lobby. His heart jumped. He glanced toward the front door, expecting perhaps the wind to have rattled the glass or a delivery truck pulling into the lot. But the noise wasn't a coincidence. It came from the heavy-duty bell above the entrance, ringing violently, almost insistently, as if demanding attention. "Who the hell would be out here at this hour?" Ruiz muttered under his breath, standing and moving cautiously toward the door. He gripped his flashlight in one hand, the other hovering near his sidearm. The shadows of the empty parking lot stretched unnaturally under the station lights, and he felt the cold brush of unease down his spine. Peering through the reinforced glass, he saw a dark, hulking shape shuffling toward the entrance. At first he assumed it was a stray animal, a large dog or a coyote perhaps, but the silhouette moved strangely, unnervingly deliberate. The creature staggered as it approached, muscles tense, eyes locked on the door. And then the porch light swung fully onto the figure, illuminating a horrifying scene. It was a dog, a massive German shepherd, but unlike any dog Ruiz had ever seen. Its fur was matted and slick with what looked unmistakably like blood. Dark, wet streaks ran down its sides and legs, dripping onto the concrete below with a sickening rhythm. The animal moved with determination, limping slightly, yet each step carried an eerie intelligence, a sense of purpose that froze Ruiz in place. Then he noticed it. Clutched firmly in the dog's jaws was something small, bundled tightly in a tattered cloth. Ruiz's stomach dropped. At first he couldn't make out what it was, his brain refused to accept the possibility. But then the faintest sound reached his ears, a fragile, wet gasp. A baby. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. The dog stumbled onto the station's front porch, shaking violently as if trying to brace itself against some invisible weight. Its paws scraped the concrete, leaving tiny streaks of blood trailing behind. It stopped at the threshold, eyes wide, wild, pleading, almost as if it was asking for help, or perhaps begging for permission. Ruiz's instincts screamed at him to move fast. He threw open the door, flashlight slicing through the darkness. "Stay back," he barked automatically, though his voice wavered. He knew the dog wasn't threatening him, at least not intentionally, but anything in this state could be dangerous. The German shepherd collapsed before him, its legs buckling under the strain. Blood seeped through its fur onto the floor, pooling around the small bundle it carried. Slowly, carefully, the dog released the baby, letting it drop onto the cold concrete. The infant was pale, lips tinged blue, wrapped in a torn, blood-soaked blanket. Its tiny chest moved in shallow, uneven breaths. Ruiz's training kicked in, though his mind raced with terror. He scooped the baby into his arms, feeling the fragile weight, the rapid, fragile heartbeat against his uniform. His radio crackled, dispatch confirming a routine check-in, but he didn't answer. He couldn't think beyond the life cradled against him. The dog, meanwhile, lay still, head on its paws, watching him with unwavering focus. Its body heaved, exhausted, every inch of it drenched in blood. Ruiz noticed the deep gashes along its flanks and neck, some fresh, some older, raw and angry. Whoever or whatever had hurt this dog had left it barely alive, yet it had still carried the baby all the way here. The thought made his chest tighten painfully. Paramedics were en route, but every second felt impossibly long. Ruiz knelt beside the dog, speaking softly. "It's okay, buddy, you're safe now. You saved this baby." The dog let out a low, trembling whine, eyes flicking to the baby in Ruiz's arms, then back to him. There was intelligence there, an understanding that went beyond instinct. The animal had done more than survive. It had performed a miracle. Suddenly, the dog's ears perked up. It growled, low and warning, turning its head toward the darkened street beyond the porch. Ruiz followed the gaze and froze. The night seemed unnaturally still, the shadows beyond the station deep and suffocating. Then a rustle in the bushes, almost imperceptible at first, grew louder. Something or someone was moving toward them. The dog's growl deepened, vibrating through its chest. Ruiz instinctively stepped in front of the baby, flashlight sweeping across the parking lot. There was no immediate threat in sight, just the oppressive blackness, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The dog's body tensed, ready to spring despite its injuries. And then the rustling stopped. Silence, heavier than before, fell over the station. Just when Ruiz thought the danger had passed, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, a figure stumbling, dragging a foot as if injured, moving with deliberate stealth. Ruiz's hand went to his radio again, but his words caught in his throat. He couldn't see clearly yet, but the figure was heading toward the station, toward the dog, toward the baby. His pulse thundered in his ears. The dog shifted slightly, muscles coiled, eyes never leaving the figure. And then, as the first clear detail came into view under the porch light, Ruiz felt a surge of horror so intense he almost dropped the infant. The shadow wasn't human. Not entirely. Its movements were jagged, unnatural, like something that didn't belong in the quiet Missouri night. Before Ruiz could react further, the dog let out a fierce, guttural bark that shattered the stillness, and the figure froze mid-step. The moment hung there, time stretching, every second loaded with anticipation and fear. Ruiz could feel it in his bones. This night was far from over. Whatever had brought the dog here and whatever it had carried the baby away from was still out there, watching, waiting. He tightened his grip on the infant, glanced at the dog, bloodied, battered, but unwavering, and whispered almost to himself, "We're going to find out who did this together." And in that moment, as the wind whispered through the trees and the station lights flickered again, Ruiz knew the next few hours would change everything. The dog had arrived at the station with a message, a warning, and a story too terrible to imagine. But the first part of that story was already written in blood and survival. Outside in the shadows just beyond the porch, eyes glimmered, silent and watchful. And the dog, wounded but vigilant, growled low, ready to confront whatever came next. The ambulance siren sliced through the still night air, a harsh contrast to the eerie quiet that had settled over the station. Officer Daniel Ruiz never stopped cradling the baby, rocking the fragile bundle as if sheer motion could steady its trembling body. The infant's tiny fingers twitched against his uniform, lips pale, face streaked with blood that wasn't entirely its own. Each breath came shallow and ragged, and Ruiz's stomach knotted with terror. He could feel the life force in the infant, a flickering flame that could be snuffed out at any second. Paramedics burst through the station doors, their voices urgent, clipped with authority. "Let's get it out of here. We need to stabilize the child," one shouted, grabbing the tiny body with gloved hands. Ruiz moved aside but refused to let his eyes leave the dog lying nearby. The German shepherd, its fur soaked in blood, raised its head slightly, eyes tracking the paramedics. The dog's chest heaved with each shallow breath, and a soft, mournful whine escaped its throat. "What the hell happened here?" one of the paramedics asked, scanning the porch. The dog let out another low growl, and Ruiz shook his head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he muttered, his eyes never leaving the creature. Then instinctively he realized something. The blood covering the dog wasn't only from the infant or from some minor scuffle. No, it was deep, dark, fresh, the kind of blood that told a story of violence, of struggle. The paramedics moved quickly, transferring the baby to a stretcher equipped with warming lights. Ruiz followed, keeping close as they lifted the fragile child into the ambulance. Inside, the medics worked frantically, checking vitals, inserting IVs, and whispering soft reassurances that seemed hollow even as they said them. The baby whimpered weakly, eyes half-lidded, the occasional gasp of air punctuating the tense silence. Ruiz's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the stretcher. Every second counted, and every second was a reminder that life hung by the thinnest thread. Meanwhile, the dog stirred. Max, the name flashed into Ruiz's mind, the one engraved on the battered collar, tried to rise again, dragging its wounded body forward. Deep gashes ran along his side, and his breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle. Ruiz knelt beside him, placing a steadying hand on his bloodied flank. "You did good, Max. You saved a life tonight," he whispered. The dog's eyes, wide and glistening, seemed to acknowledge the words. A faint tail wagged, the only sign of defiance against exhaustion. Then, without warning, Max's ears pricked up. His gaze snapped toward the woods beyond the station, muscles coiling despite his battered body. A rustling sound, faint but distinct, echoed from the tree line. Ruiz stiffened. Every instinct told him something, someone or something, was still out there. He reached for his radio but froze as a shadow moved among the trees. The darkness concealed it, yet the weight of its presence pressed on the night like a living thing. Max growled low, his body tensing as if preparing for one last confrontation. The paramedics, busy with the baby, didn't notice at first. Ruiz took a step forward, heart hammering, flashlight slicing the night. Then the shadow moved again, just beyond the reach of the porch light. A stumble, a scraping sound on leaves, almost deliberate. The hairs on the back of Ruiz's neck stood straight. His mind raced. The dog had carried this baby through some unimaginable ordeal, and whatever had threatened them was likely still out there, watching, waiting. The ambulance engine roared to life, breaking the tension for a moment. Ruiz climbed inside, staying close to the baby as medics worked. He noticed Max lying on the porch, a hero unwilling to give up, breathing heavily, chest heaving with every painful breath. He pressed a hand to the dog's head. "Hang in there, buddy. You've got to hold on." The dog's eyes met his, unblinking, as if promising he would. Then, as the ambulance doors closed, the tree line shifted. A movement too deliberate to be a small animal, something big, lurking in the shadows, watching them disappear. The ride to the hospital was tense, filled with the beeping of monitors and the occasional whispered instructions from the medics. Ruiz never let go of the baby, murmuring words he wasn't sure would help. Minutes stretched like hours. Every bump in the road made him flinch. Every shadow outside the windows seemed alive. And somewhere in the darkness, he could still sense the danger from the station, the lingering presence of whatever had caused this nightmare. At the hospital, the staff moved with practiced efficiency, rushing the baby into the emergency room. Ruiz followed, heart pounding, gripping the edge of the gurney as nurses and doctors swarmed. Machines beeped and whirred, tiny stethoscopes pressed to fragile chests, hands working quickly to stabilize an infant who had already endured too much. The baby's eyes fluttered open for a moment, just enough for Ruiz to catch the faintest hint of recognition, and then closed again, exhausted. While the medical team worked, Ruiz sat on a plastic chair nearby, head in his hands, trying to process the events of the past hour. Max, the baby, the shadow in the woods, it all blended together, a nightmarish sequence that refused to make sense. And then the hospital vet team arrived, led by a woman with a calm but urgent demeanor. "We need to operate immediately," she said, glancing toward the station phone. "There's a German Shepherd outside, critical condition. You said this was the dog." Ruiz nodded, voice barely audible. "Max, he saved the baby. He carried her all the way to the station." The vet team hurried Max into a treatment room adjacent to the emergency department. Ruiz watched the doors close, heart clenched with worry. Hours passed in agonizing tension. The baby's vitals stabilized slowly, thanks to rapid interventions, but Max's condition was precarious. Wounds covered his body, claw marks, deep lacerations, punctures that suggested a fight with something far larger and more aggressive than a stray dog. Ruiz thought back to the blood, the smell of iron in the air, and the twisted wreck of a car that must have been the source of the chaos. Max had dragged the baby through the night, against injuries that would have felled any ordinary animal. He had somehow sensed danger, evaded it, and reached the one place he knew could offer safety. The thought was almost too much to bear, the realization of what Max had endured and accomplished. Night slowly gave way to the first hints of dawn. Ruiz remained in the hospital, leaning against a wall, exhaustion pressing on his body but unable to sleep. Every few minutes he would check the monitors for the baby's heart rate, every glance a reminder that life was a fragile gift. Then from the adjacent room, a soft, pained bark echoed, a signal that Max was fighting for his own survival. Ruiz's stomach twisted. He had saved the baby, but could he save the dog who had done the impossible? And then the nurse approached, a hesitant look in her eyes. "Officer, there's something else," she said quietly. "Something in the woods. We found footprints near the scene, huge, clawed. Whoever or whatever attacked the car, it didn't leave quietly." Ruiz felt the chill run down his spine. The nightmare wasn't over. Someone or something was still out there. The baby stirred in her fragile sleep, small whimpers escaping, while Max's bark echoed again, faint but defiant. Ruiz sat frozen, realizing that the night's horrors were only beginning to unravel, that the threads connecting the crash, the dog, the baby, and the unknown threat in the shadows were far from resolved. And somewhere in the woods, eyes still watched, patient and predatory, waiting for the next moment to strike. Ruiz exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the chair. "We're going to find out the truth," he whispered, almost to himself, almost as a promise. Outside, the night held its secrets tight, refusing to give up what had transpired. And for Max, the dog who had carried a life through blood and darkness, the fight for survival was far from over. By the time the paramedics had stabilized the baby and rolled her into the ambulance, the night seemed heavier, almost suffocating. Officer Daniel Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that the story was far from over. Something in Max's behavior had gnawed at him all night. The way the dog had dragged himself to the station, eyes flicking back toward the darkness, as if urging him to follow. Against every protocol drilled into him over years of law enforcement, Ruiz knew he couldn't ignore it. "Go," he whispered to himself, gripping his flashlight and holster tightly. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped out of the station. Max, still bloodied but alert, struggled to rise. He blinked slowly at Ruiz as though saying, "This way." The dog limped toward the tree line at the edge of the county road, paws leaving dark smears on the asphalt. Two cruisers followed cautiously, lights cutting through the darkness in narrow beams, engines humming low. The dog moved with deliberate determination, every step measured despite the obvious pain in its flanks. Ruiz's heart pounded with a mix of fear and awe. Max was leading them somewhere, but where? And what would they find? The night seemed alive with tension. Every rustle in the underbrush made officers tense, hands instinctively hovering over holsters, breath visible in the cold air. After nearly a mile, Max abruptly veered off the road, slipping into the dense woods with uncanny agility. The officers called for him to stop, but he ignored them, dragging his injured body along a narrow, barely visible path. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy, casting eerie shadows that danced across fallen branches and thick undergrowth. Rustling, snapping twigs, the faint crunch of leaves underfoot. Every sound amplified the suspense, every shadow a possible threat. Ruiz flicked his flashlight across the path. Blood stained the leaves and earth in dark, glistening streaks. Tiny footprints, almost too small for an adult, were pressed into the soil, smeared with the same dark liquid. Something had happened here. A struggle, a fight, but what? He felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Max, undeterred, pressed forward, every movement determined, urgent. The dog's focus was absolute, the kind of focus that only comes from purpose or desperation. And then they reached it. The faint outline of a vehicle appeared through the trees, twisted and broken like a piece of scrap metal tossed aside. The car had collided violently with a large oak, crumpled and distorted beyond recognition. The driver's side door was hanging open at an unnatural angle, jagged metal protruding like teeth. Glass littered the surrounding ground, catching the flashlight beams in scattered, deadly reflections. The stench of blood and fuel hung thick in the air, sharp and metallic. One of the officers stifled a gasp. "Holy God," he muttered. Ruiz swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves as he approached the wreckage. Inside the driver's seat slumped a young woman, unconscious, blood covering her face and chest. Her breaths were shallow enough to make him panic. The backseat, once filled with the debris of family life, was a horror show: shattered glass, torn upholstery, and an empty baby carrier soaked red. Ruiz's mind raced. The realization hit with the force of a hammer. Max hadn't just carried the baby to the station. He had pulled her from this wreck, through the forest, over the road, bloodied and wounded himself, and delivered her into human hands. The magnitude of the dog's actions sent a shiver through Ruiz. Yet something gnawed at him. There was too much blood. Not all of it could be from the car accident alone. A sudden noise made everyone freeze. A low, guttural growl somewhere deeper in the woods. The officers turned sharply, flashlights swinging wildly, illuminating only shadows. Max stiffened, fur bristling, growl deepening into a threatening rumble. The woods were dark, oppressive, as if concealing a predator waiting for the right moment. Ruiz instinctively reached for his radio, but even as he called for backup, the growl grew louder, closer, echoing unnaturally through the trees. "Everyone stay behind me," Ruiz ordered, stepping forward cautiously. The adrenaline surged through him, sharpened senses on high alert. The officers obeyed, forming a protective line behind him. Max, despite his injuries, positioned himself at the forefront, hackles raised, ready to defend the scene. The night seemed to hold its breath, the silence punctuated only by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant cry of an owl. Then movement. Something large shifted just beyond the broken canopy, eyes reflecting the flashlight beams, golden, predatory, and filled with hunger. A mountain lion, wounded but still dangerous, emerged from the shadows, limping from what looked like a deep gash along its side. The realization hit Ruiz like a punch. The accident had occurred on the edge of its territory. The baby, exposed in the car and later in the forest, had been at the mercy of this predator. The officers reacted instantly. One raised his rifle, firing a warning shot that cracked through the night. The mountain lion paused, ears flat, eyes locked on Max and the officers, then disappeared into the underbrush. The moment passed, leaving only tension, the silence broken by shallow breathing and the drip of blood from the wrecked car. Max collapsed beside the vehicle, body trembling, muscles slack with exhaustion. Ruiz knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his flank. The dog had fought a predator, carried a baby through the night, and somehow survived long enough to reach them. Yet now he looked barely able to move, chest heaving, eyes wide with exhaustion and pain. Ruiz's heart ached, torn between fear for the baby's mother, fear for Max, and anger at the cruel randomness of fate. "Hang on, Max," Ruiz whispered. "You're not done yet." The dog's gaze met his, and for a moment the heroism of the night crystallized in those eyes, courage beyond understanding, loyalty beyond measure. It was the kind of moment that could make a seasoned officer break down, and Ruiz felt tears prick at his eyes, unbidden. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that transcended the chaos and bloodshed surrounding them. As paramedics arrived at the wreck, the team moved quickly to assess the mother, unconscious but alive, and transport her to the hospital. Ruiz stayed with Max, stroking his head, whispering reassurances. Every scrape, every laceration, every drop of blood told a story of sacrifice, of courage, of a dog willing to face death to save a life. But even as the ambulance doors closed, taking the mother and baby to safety, Ruiz noticed the forest shift once more. Shadows moved in ways that suggested calculation, patience, and intent. Whatever had attacked the car, whatever had endangered the baby, was still out there, waiting for its chance. Max's ears twitched at the sound, his body tensing despite the blood and exhaustion. Ruiz felt a shiver of foreboding. He realized with a sinking certainty that the night's events were far from over. The accident, the fight, the rescue, they were pieces of a larger, terrifying puzzle. And somewhere beyond the trees, something watched, calculating, patient. The suspense was palpable, thick as the fog that now crept along the road leading out of the forest. Max gave a low, strained bark, a signal that was more warning than greeting. Ruiz leaned closer, pressing his forehead against the dog's, whispering, "We'll finish this together, I promise." For a brief moment the forest seemed to hold its breath, the darkness alive with unseen eyes waiting. Then slowly the sounds of the night began to return, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, but the sense of danger remained, heavy, omnipresent. Ruiz looked back at the wrecked car one last time. The image of the young mother slumped inside, the baby ripped from immediate danger by a battered but heroic dog, seared itself into his mind. This was no ordinary night. This was a story of courage, survival, and the tenuous thread separating life and death. And somewhere in the shadows, the threat that had started it all lingered, watching, waiting for its next move. As the team prepared to transport Max to emergency veterinary care, Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that the dog's ordeal wasn't over. The heroics of the night had bought them time, but the night still had secrets, dark, lingering, and dangerous. He vowed silently, gripping the dog's collar, that they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The forest around the wrecked car was unnervingly silent, the kind of silence that pressed on the chest and made every rustle of leaves sound like a scream. Officer Daniel Ruiz knelt beside Max, his bloodied hands trembling slightly as he tried to calm the exhausted dog. The German shepherd's breathing was shallow but steady, eyes fixed on the dark tree line as if daring whatever had attacked to come closer. For Ruiz, every instinct screamed that the danger wasn't gone, it had only been delayed. Paramedics worked quickly at the wreck, their flashlights casting stark beams across twisted metal and shattered glass. The young mother lay slumped in the driver's seat, blood matted in her hair and smeared across her face. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath a battle. Ruiz's stomach twisted at the sight and he swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus. He knew he had to be the calm anchor in this chaos, for the mother, for the baby, for Max. He leaned closer, gently shaking her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with me," he urged, voice steady despite the racing of his heart. She stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering, a faint groan escaping her lips. Relief washed over him in a wave, but it was short-lived. The backseat told a far darker story. The baby carrier lay abandoned, ripped open, drenched in blood, fabric shredded. Whoever had attacked this family had left a trail of destruction that could have ended in tragedy. Max whimpered softly beside him, as if aware of the peril the baby had faced. Ruiz's hands instinctively stroked the dog's head. "You did this, you saved her," he whispered, voice breaking. The thought that Max had faced some unknown predator to rescue the child made his chest tighten. And yet, a gnawing fear lingered. There was still too much blood, too many unanswered questions. The scene felt incomplete, a puzzle missing pieces he couldn't yet see. Then came the low growl. It started faintly, almost imperceptible, then rose steadily, vibrating through the quiet night. Ruiz froze. Max's ears twitched, muscles coiling despite the exhaustion and pain that seemed to have stolen his strength. The officer slowly lifted his flashlight toward the woods, the beam cutting a thin path through the dense darkness. Movement, a large, shadowed figure shifted among the trees. It wasn't human, not fully, not entirely natural. "Get back," Ruiz barked to the paramedics and fellow officers, heart hammering. The figure moved closer, deliberate, stalking, eyes glinting with an unholy intelligence. A deep guttural snarl ripped through the air. Ruiz's stomach dropped. The creature wasn't just a threat, it was the source of all this chaos. The wreck, the blood, the injuries, it had been hunting, and Max had intervened. The realization hit with staggering weight. Without the dog, the baby might already be gone. Max shifted, a low growl rumbling from his chest, warning the unseen predator. Despite the blood, despite the lacerations that left him trembling, he planted himself firmly between Ruiz, the mother, and the backseat. Every muscle in the dog's body screamed readiness, loyalty, defiance. It was a sight that struck Ruiz silent for a heartbeat. A battered animal, fighting for life and love against odds no human could have endured. Then the predator revealed itself. A mountain lion, large and wounded, claw marks visible along its flanks, limping slightly but still a terrifying silhouette of raw power. It paused at the edge of the wreckage, muscles tense, tail flicking in agitation. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The officers raised weapons, rifles aimed, lights focused on the creature. Ruiz's mind raced. One wrong move, one panicked shot, and everything could erupt into bloodshed again. The mountain lion growled low, the sound vibrating in Ruiz's chest. Max barked back, weak but unwavering, a staccato warning that defied logic. It was clear. The dog had confronted this predator, risked its own life, and carried the infant to safety despite every injury. Ruiz felt a lump form in his throat. He had never seen courage so pure, so raw, and yet he couldn't ignore the danger that still lingered. The predator hesitated, calculating, then disappeared into the shadows of the trees, leaving a tension that lingered like a fog. Max collapsed beside the wreck once more, breathing ragged, body trembling. Ruiz knelt, pressing a hand to his flank. Every laceration, every gash told the story of a battle fought in the dark, alone, with stakes higher than any human could understand. "You saved her. Now it's your turn," he murmured, voice tight with emotion. Paramedics moved swiftly, carefully extricating the mother from the wreck. Her body was battered, but she was alive, a miracle, no doubt aided by Max's heroic intervention. Ruiz helped guide her onto a stretcher, then looked back at the forest. The darkness seemed to pulse with unseen eyes, watching, waiting. He knew instinctively that the predator had not vanished entirely. It was patient, lurking, ready to strike again if the opportunity arose. The baby's carrier, now empty and drenched in blood, served as a grim reminder of what could have been. Ruiz's mind flashed to the moments before Max had carried the child to safety. The risk, the fear, the possibility of death at every turn. The dog had faced not only the predator but the unforgiving night, injuries and exhaustion to fulfill a purpose beyond instinct. It was almost too much to comprehend. Finally, the wreck cleared enough for officers to examine the scene. Broken glass, twisted metal, and bloodstains told a story of violence and survival. The mother's car had collided violently with an oak, but there was more to the scene than mere accident. Claw marks along the hood, deep gouges in the roof, evidence of a struggle before the crash. Ruiz's pulse quickened. Someone or something had caused this, and the forest was holding its secrets close. Max stirred weakly, lifting his head and giving a faint whine. Ruiz stroked his neck, careful not to worsen the dog's injuries. "You've done enough already," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. But Max's gaze remained fixed on the tree line, unwavering, as if insisting the battle wasn't over. Ruiz swallowed hard, realizing the dog had already taken on more than any human could bear, and was still standing, still vigilant. As the mother and baby were carefully loaded into the ambulance, Ruiz caught one last glance at the forest. Shadows shifted among the trees, the rustle of leaves betraying the presence of the predator somewhere out there. The adrenaline, the fear, the tension of the night, it all pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. Max, exhausted, lay on the ground, his body battered but unbowed. Ruiz knelt beside him, pressing his forehead against the dog. "You've done more than I ever could have imagined," he whispered. Max let out a faint, strained bark, then rested his head against Ruiz's hand. There was no joy in the moment, only relief tempered by the knowledge that danger still lurked. The night wasn't over, not yet. Somewhere in the shadows, eyes glimmered, calculating, waiting. And Ruiz understood with bone-deep certainty that while Max had saved a life tonight, the horrors that had begun in the dark woods were far from finished. The night air pressed in on the wrecked car like a living thing. Officer Daniel Ruiz knelt beside Max, his hands stained with both blood and grime, eyes fixed on the dog who had just carried a fragile life through the horrors of the forest. The German shepherd shivered violently, muscles trembling, yet his eyes remained locked on the shadows beyond the trees, unwavering. Max's loyalty was unbreakable, his courage extraordinary, and Ruiz felt a swell of admiration, tinged with a gnawing fear. The danger wasn't gone, it had merely retreated into the darkness. Suddenly, a rustle echoed from deeper in the woods. The sound was subtle at first, a snapping branch, leaves shifting, but it carried the weight of intent. Max growled low, a guttural sound that vibrated through the cold night. His fur bristled, and despite his exhaustion, his body tensed as if preparing for one last confrontation. Ruiz swallowed hard, hand hovering near his holster, flashlight cutting through the shadows. Whatever was out there wasn't small. A figure emerged, Large, crouched low, movements deliberate and predatory. The shape froze when Max barked again, louder this time, warning the unseen intruder that the ground they occupied belonged to no ordinary observer. The officer's heart thumped in his chest. It was the mountain lion from the wreck site, but this time its injuries didn't slow it enough to deter it. Its golden eyes glimmered with calculated hunger, muscles rippling under fur matted with blood and dirt. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Ruiz gripped Max's collar, whispering softly, "Stay with me, stay with the baby, stay with me." The dog's ears twitched. He emitted a soft whine that was both warning and plea. Ruiz's mind raced. If the predator attacked, there would be no time to save Max. The realization that this dog, battered and bleeding, had carried a human child through such peril made him both awed and terrified. He had never witnessed bravery like this, and yet the stakes were escalating by the second. The mountain lion lunged suddenly, claws flashing in the dim flashlight glow. Max sprang to his feet, muscles taut despite the lacerations and exhaustion. The impact of the attack sent a shockwave through the officers standing nearby. Shots rang out from the patrol rifles, bullets tearing into the air, but the forest absorbed the sound. The mountain lion recoiled, only to crouch and charge again, eyes locked on the battered German shepherd. Ruiz felt panic clawing at his chest. He couldn't abandon the dog, yet he knew bullets could easily escalate the situation. The predator circled, waiting for a gap in defense. Max barked ferociously, teeth bared, eyes never leaving the lion. Then, against all odds, the German shepherd lunged, intercepting the predator mid-charge, teeth sinking into fur, growls and snarls erupting into the night. The struggle was violent, raw, a dance of survival and ferocity. The officers moved cautiously closer, but the tension in the air was suffocating. One misstep could endanger both human and animal. Ruiz's breath came fast, eyes darting between Max and the predator. Every strike, every dodge, every pained whine from Max made his stomach churn. The dog's body was clearly battered, some movements labored, but his spirit was unbroken. Ruiz realized the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about loyalty, courage, and the sheer will to protect life at all costs. Finally, the predator seemed to assess the situation. Perhaps recognizing Max's determination and the officer's presence, it backed into the shadows, limping but alive. Its eyes glimmered, calculating, before it vanished into the thick woods, leaving the clearing eerily silent except for the ragged panting of the exhausted dog. Ruiz exhaled slowly, muscles loosening, but the adrenaline still buzzed violently in his veins. Max stood slowly, shaking his battered frame, eyes still flicking toward the tree line as if ensuring the danger had truly gone. Max collapsed beside the car, his legs quivering but alive. Ruiz knelt, pressing his hands into the fur, feeling the warmth of life still pulsing through the dog's body. "You did it, you saved her," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. The sheer intensity of what had transpired, the car crash, the mountain lion, the journey through the woods, was almost impossible to process. Yet Max's eyes met his, a mix of pain and unyielding courage, and Ruiz felt a deep, unspoken connection. Paramedics quickly attended to the mother, stabilizing her for transport. The baby, now secured safely, cried softly, fragile whimpers that seemed impossibly small against the violence of the night. Ruiz stayed with Max, speaking to him softly as the night stretched on. He knew that the dog had endured unimaginable trauma, but the animal's loyalty and determination had prevented a tragedy of unimaginable scale. Hours passed in tense silence. The baby's cries eventually gave way to soft coos as the medics ensured her warmth and safety. The mother remained unconscious but stable. Ruiz finally allowed himself a breath, watching Max's chest rise and fall in shallow but steady rhythm. The forest, once alive with menace, was silent again, though the lingering presence of the predator's eyes felt almost palpable, watching from the shadows, patient and calculating. A veterinary team arrived, ready to administer emergency care. Max was gently lifted onto a stretcher, every movement careful to avoid worsening his wounds. As he was wheeled toward the ambulance, Ruiz knelt, whispering over and over, "You're a hero, Max. You saved a life tonight, and I will never forget it." The dog's head lifted slightly, eyes meeting Ruiz's, and a faint whine escaped, a sound that conveyed both exhaustion and understanding. The forest around the wreck seemed to close in, shadows thickening, concealing the predator that had caused this chaos. Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that this night's events were far from over. Max had survived against overwhelming odds, but the mountain lion, or whatever force had instigated the attack, remained out there, hidden but alert. He knew the wilderness held secrets, and some were far more dangerous than any officer could face alone. Finally, as Max was loaded into the ambulance for emergency veterinary care, Ruiz lingered at the edge of the clearing. He stared into the darkness, flashlight scanning the tree line, every nerve on edge. The night was silent now, but it was a deceptive calm. Somewhere beyond the shadows, the threat persisted, watching, waiting for the next moment to strike. For the first time, Ruiz allowed himself a fleeting thought. Max had carried a baby through death itself, fought off a predator, and survived unimaginable injuries. But what if the night still had more in store? What if the danger wasn't done? The weight of the unknown pressed down, a reminder that heroism often comes at unimaginable cost. Max, exhausted but alive, rested in the ambulance, eyes half closed, still trembling but defiant. Ruiz placed a hand gently on the dog's flank one last time before the doors closed, a silent promise forming in his mind. I will make sure your bravery is never forgotten. And somewhere deep in the forest, the predator waited, muscles coiled, eyes glinting with a patience that was almost human in its calculation. The night wasn't finished, and neither was the story. The ambulance sirens blared through the quiet Missouri streets, a frantic wail cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Officer Daniel Ruiz held his breath as paramedics worked quickly, transferring the baby into the hospital's emergency room. The infant's tiny body was wrapped in blood-soaked blankets, frail yet astonishingly alive. Every weak whimper, every flicker of eyelids, sent a surge of adrenaline through Ruiz's veins. She was safe for the moment, but the night's terror had not ended. Max, barely able to stand, was wheeled into the veterinary emergency unit. Blood matted his fur and deep lacerations traced along his neck, flanks, and legs. Despite the exhaustion that pulled at every muscle, the dog's eyes remained sharp, alert, tracking Ruiz's every movement. Paramedics and vets exchanged glances, quietly shaking their heads at the severity of his injuries. Ruiz's chest tightened as he knelt beside him. "You carried a life through hell," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You've earned every chance to live." Inside the hospital, the baby's condition remained critical. Doctors worked with precision, monitoring vitals, inserting IVs, and providing warmth to stabilize the fragile infant. Ruiz hovered nearby, hand pressed gently against the gurney, whispering reassurances he hoped she could hear. Each monitor beep, each gentle sigh, was a heartbeat of hope in a night consumed by fear. Every moment reinforced the miracle that had just occurred. Against impossible odds, the child had survived. The mother, unconscious but alive, was stabilized in a nearby operating room. Blood loss, blunt trauma, and internal injuries had brought her perilously close to death. Ruiz could only watch, heart pounding, as surgeons moved with urgency and precision. In the quiet moments between frantic activity, he allowed himself to think about what had brought them here. The wreck, the predator, the courage of a battered German shepherd who had risked everything to save a human life. Hours passed in a blur of clinical efficiency and heart-wrenching uncertainty. The baby began to stir, tiny fingers flexing as she cooed softly. Ruiz allowed himself a small smile, relief tempered by exhaustion. But the tension remained, thick and unyielding, because his thoughts kept drifting back to Max. The dog had given everything, yet his fight for survival was far from over. Finally, a veterinary team approached, the urgency in their eyes unmistakable. "We need to operate immediately," one nurse said, glancing toward Ruiz. "The dog's injuries are severe. He's lost a lot of blood and there are deep puncture wounds we need to address." Ruiz nodded, swallowing hard. "Do whatever it takes," he whispered, voice tight with emotion. He saved her. He saved the baby. Max was gently lifted onto a surgical table. His eyes, though tired and clouded with pain, flickered up to Ruiz as if seeking reassurance. The vet team worked swiftly, cleaning wounds, administering pain medication, and preparing for emergency surgery. Ruiz remained close, whispering words of encouragement he wasn't sure the dog could comprehend, yet certain that Max could sense the care and urgency. Minutes dragged into hours as the team worked tirelessly. Outside the ICU, Ruiz paced the sterile hallway, heart hammering, mind replaying the night's events in agonizing detail. He thought of the tree line, the predator's eyes, the way Max had fought with every ounce of strength to save the child. He thought of the mother, unconscious, the baby now stabilized, and the fine line between life and death that had been crossed more than once that night. Then a nurse approached, her expression hesitant. "Officer Ruiz, the mother has woken up. She's asking about her baby and the dog." Ruiz felt a lump form in his throat. He hurried to her bedside, gently taking her hand as her eyes fluttered open, hazy but aware. "Your baby, she's safe," he said softly, voice trembling. The mother's lips moved, whispering a single name. "Max," she murmured. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and Ruiz felt a wave of emotion he could barely contain. Back in the veterinary ICU, Max's condition fluctuated dangerously. His vitals spiked and dropped with terrifying irregularity, every monitor beep sending a jolt of fear through Ruiz's chest. Nurses and vets worked frantically, moving with precision, trying to stabilize the hero of the night. At one point, the monitor flatlined briefly, and Ruiz's stomach dropped into his boots. But a swift intervention, an adrenaline shot, and careful monitoring brought Max back from the brink. The room held its breath collectively, the faint rise and fall of his chest a victory in a night already drenched in terror. Hours later, as dawn began to pierce the horizon, a tentative calm settled over the hospital. The baby slept quietly, her tiny chest rising and falling evenly. The mother, now alert, held a frail hand over her child's back, eyes wide with gratitude and disbelief. Ruiz stood nearby, watching the quiet miracle, yet his gaze kept drifting to Max. The dog lay on the surgical table, exhausted, covered in bandages, yet alive. Every breath he took was a reminder of the courage, loyalty, and sheer determination that had carried a life through impossible odds. News crews began arriving, alerted by the extraordinary events. The story of the bloodied German shepherd who had carried a baby through the night captured national attention almost instantly. Social media lit up with images, videos, and headlines that celebrated the heroism of a battered animal who had become something more than a pet. He was a savior. Ruiz watched the coverage with a mix of pride and trepidation. The attention was deserved, but the gravity of the night remained with him, an indelible imprint on his mind. Even as reporters crowded the hospital lobby, asking questions and filming, Ruiz noticed a flicker of awareness in Max's eyes. The dog had endured unthinkable pain, yet even now he seemed alert to the environment, his gaze scanning the room, muscles coiled beneath bandages. Ruiz knelt beside him once more, gently stroking his head. "You did it," he whispered. "You've done more than anyone could ever ask." Max let out a faint whine, a sound that seemed to acknowledge the words, a fragile thread of connection between human and hero. And yet, despite the relief, the hospital held an undercurrent of tension. The forest outside, the predator, the blood-stained wreck, none of it was fully resolved. The night had left scars on everyone involved, human and canine alike. Ruiz knew the danger had been narrowly avoided, but the memory of the predator lurking in the shadows remained vivid, a constant reminder that courage often comes at unimaginable cost. Finally, after endless hours, the medical and veterinary teams allowed a brief respite. The mother rested, the baby was stable, and Max was alive, albeit battered. Ruiz sat quietly, hands clasped, reflecting on the night's events. The heroism of a single dog had saved a family, confronted a deadly predator, and endured injuries that would have felled lesser creatures. The realization was both awe-inspiring and humbling. As he left the ICU briefly to call for reinforcements at the station, Ruiz felt a flicker of unease. The predator had been driven off for now, but he could not shake the feeling that the night's horrors were not yet finished. Somewhere in the shadows, eyes still watched, waiting, patient and calculating. The danger had been interrupted, not eliminated. He returned to Max's side just as the dog stirred weakly, head lifting slightly, tail giving a faint wag. Ruiz knelt, pressing his forehead against Max's. "You've done enough," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Rest now. You've saved lives tonight more than anyone could imagine." Max let out a soft bark, almost as if acknowledging the promise, then settled, chest rising and falling in shallow but steady rhythm. For Ruiz, the night's events were seared into memory. Max had carried a baby through blood, darkness, and danger. He had confronted a predator, endured injuries, and refused to give in. And in the quiet, fragile moments of dawn, Ruiz understood the full weight of what had occurred. Courage, loyalty, and sacrifice could transcend species. But even as sunlight crept through the hospital windows, a subtle tension lingered, a whisper of the unseen threat that had caused the chaos. The night had tested everyone, human and canine alike, and though the immediate danger had passed, the shadows of the forest still held secrets. And Ruiz, seated beside a battered but heroic dog, understood that the story was far from over. The morning sun barely pierced the hospital windows, casting pale light across the sterile floors as Officer Daniel Ruiz sat beside Max. The dog, hero of the night, lay on a stretcher, bandages crisscrossing his bloodied body. His chest rose and fell with measured breaths, but the exhaustion was written in every trembling muscle, every half-lidded eye. Ruiz's hand hovered over him, reluctant to move, as if even a slight touch could shatter the fragile thread between life and death. The baby slept peacefully nearby, wrapped in a warm blanket, her tiny fingers curling gently around the mother's hand. The mother, still pale but stable, watched her child with a mixture of awe, relief, and disbelief. Both had survived the night's horrors because of one dog's bravery, a battered, bloodied dog who refused to surrender. Ruiz's chest tightened as he absorbed the magnitude of it all. Max had faced death and emerged victorious, though just barely. Suddenly, a sharp alarm blared from the hospital's security system. The instinctive tension of the previous night surged back into Ruiz's veins. He bolted upright, eyes scanning the corridor. Something wasn't right. The monitor above Max beeped irregularly, drawing his attention. The dog's heart rate spiked, shallow breaths becoming erratic. His body tensed, trembling violently as if he could sense the danger that still lingered in the shadows. A nurse rushed over, panic written across her face. "His vitals are unstable. We need to move him into surgery again." Ruiz nodded, his heart hammering. He pressed his hand against Max's flank, whispering encouragement. "Stay with me, you're not done yet." The dog let out a faint whine, eyes meeting his, a silent acknowledgement that he understood. Despite the injuries, despite the near-death journey, Max's spirit remained unbroken. Paramedics and veterinary staff moved swiftly, carefully lifting Max onto a mobile surgical table. Every step was calculated to avoid further injury, yet time was of the essence. Ruiz followed, keeping his gaze locked on the dog. He could not lose him now, not after everything, not after the child had survived. Max had carried a life through blood and danger. Now it was the humans' turn to save him. As they wheeled him into surgery, Ruiz stepped back, heart pounding. Memories of the night played vividly. Max dragging the baby through the forest, the snarling predator stalking them, the wrecked car, the mother unconscious, the smell of blood and fear thick in the air. Each memory brought a shiver, a mix of horror and awe. Max had faced what no ordinary animal could survive and carried a fragile life into human hands. Hours passed in tense silence. The surgical team worked with precision, repairing punctures, stitching deep lacerations, and administering critical care. Ruiz remained nearby, packing, his mind a whirlwind of emotions, pride, fear, gratitude, and terror. Outside the operating room, the world continued unaware of the drama that had unfolded, of the dog who had saved a baby from death itself, and of the predator still lurking in the shadows. Finally, the vet emerged, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "He's stable for now," she said quietly. We've done everything we can. His body's strong, but he's not out of the woods yet. He needs rest and careful monitoring." Ruiz nodded, relief flooding him even as a new tension settled in. Max had survived the night's horrors, but the ordeal had taken a severe toll. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath was a victory won with tremendous cost. Ruiz moved closer to the stretcher, pressing his forehead gently against Max's. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved her. You saved them. You're a hero, Max, and you're going to be okay." The dog's eyes flickered, a faint tail wag signaling acknowledgement, a silent promise of resilience. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft beeping of monitors, the gentle rustle of blankets, and the faint whine escaping from Max. Meanwhile, the mother and baby remained in recovery, their vital signs steadily improving. Ruiz watched them, awestruck, the realization hitting him fully. Without Max, both might have perished. The baby's soft coos, the mother's weak but steady breathing, and the dog's tentative strength formed a fragile triangle of survival, a testament to courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between human and animal. But even as relief washed over him, Ruiz felt a subtle, chilling unease. The forest, the predator, the wreck, it had all left scars that weren't visible. Somewhere beyond the hospital walls, in the quiet and darkness of the world, a threat still lingered. Max's instincts, finely tuned and painfully evident, suggested that the night's terror might not be fully over. He pressed a hand gently against Max's flank, a silent promise. They would face whatever came next together. Hours turned into a tense morning. The baby's cries grew stronger, stronger with each passing hour, while the mother smiled weakly, tears of gratitude streaking her pale cheeks. Ruiz remained steadfast by Max's side, refusing to leave. The hospital staff marveled at the dog's resilience, the medical miracle that had kept him alive despite the odds. Max's body was battered, his spirit tested, yet his loyalty remained unshaken. Finally, a faint light broke through the hospital window, illuminating Max's bloodied but vigilant form. Ruiz leaned closer, voice low and steady. "You're more than a dog, Max. You're a hero. You've carried life through the darkness and you've survived it, and now you can rest." The dog's eyes softened, a flicker of trust and recognition passing between them. The hero of the night had endured, but the memory of danger still lingered, unspoken but palpable. As Max's breathing slowly steadied, Ruiz allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The night had been one of chaos, fear, and unimaginable courage. He had witnessed a dog carry a baby through blood, darkness, and danger, confront a predator and emerge alive. He had seen a mother and child saved by loyalty and instinct, by a bond that transcended species. And yet, the predator that had instigated the chaos had not been fully dealt with, leaving a lingering sense of unease. Hours later, with Max resting, the baby cooing softly, and the mother now awake and aware, Ruiz sat quietly, hands clasped, heart heavy with the weight of what had transpired. The story of the night of blood, courage, and survival was seared into his mind. Max had been more than a dog. He had been a guardian, a hero, and a beacon of life in a night dominated by darkness. And yet, as the hospital settled into a fragile calm, Ruiz could not shake the feeling that the night's horrors had left something lingering, something that had watched, waited, and disappeared only temporarily. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the forest, the memory of the predator remained, patient and calculating, waiting for the moment to strike again. Ruiz glanced down at Max, breathing steady but shallow. "We're not done," he whispered. "Not yet, but you've already done more than anyone could ask." Max shifted slightly, eyes lifting to meet his, faintly wagging his tail, a silent acknowledgement of both exhaustion and resilience. The night's battles were over, but the story of bravery, survival, and the lingering unknown was far from complete. The morning sun spilled golden light into the hospital room, washing over the sterile walls and the soft hum of monitors. Officer Daniel Ruiz sat beside Max, whose bandaged body trembled with exhaustion. The battered German shepherd, the hero of the night, had survived wounds that would have felled any ordinary dog. Yet his loyalty and courage remained unbroken, eyes following Ruiz with unwavering trust. Every shallow breath he took was a victory. every heartbeat a testament to the impossible journey he had endured. Across the room, the mother cradled her baby, tears streaking her cheeks as she whispered soft, incomprehensible words of gratitude. The infant cooed faintly, reaching up with tiny, trembling hands, instinctively seeking warmth and security. The mother's lips quivered as she looked at Ruiz, eyes wide with awe. He saved her," she whispered, voice barely audible. Ruiz nodded, swallowing hard, unable to fully express the weight of what had occurred. Max had carried the baby through blood, darkness, and danger, facing a predator and exhaustion that would have broken lesser beings. Outside the hospital, the world was beginning to stir, unaware of the chaos that had raged just hours before. News crews had begun broadcasting the incredible story. The bloody dog who had dragged a baby to safety faced a deadly predator and endured injuries that would challenge the strongest human. Social media erupted with hashtags, images, and videos celebrating the courage of Max. The nation was captivated, drawn into the tale of loyalty, bravery, and survival. But even amidst the celebration, Ruiz remained vigilant. His instincts, honed over years in law enforcement, refused to ignore the lingering danger. The forest, the wrecked car, the predator, it had not fully retreated. Somewhere in shadows and underbrush, the threat still lurked, patient and calculating. He pressed a hand to Max's flank gently, whispering, "You've done everything. Rest now, we'll keep the rest under control." Max responded with a faint wag of his tail, eyes softening, a silent promise of resilience and trust. Hours passed and the mother's condition continued to stabilize. She finally spoke, voice weak but steady. I don't even know how to thank him," she said, glancing down at the baby, now sleeping peacefully in her arms. Ruiz smiled, pride and humility coiling in his chest. "You already did," he replied. "By surviving, by holding on, that's all Max ever wanted." The mother's gaze shifted toward the bandaged dog resting nearby, eyes wide with wonder. "He's a hero," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. The hospital staff, too, marveled at Max's recovery. Nurses whispered softly among themselves, astonished by the dog's resilience, the depth of his loyalty, and the sheer determination that had carried a baby through unimaginable peril. Ruiz remained quietly by Max's side, monitoring his breathing, offering soft words of reassurance, ensuring that the hero of the night felt recognized and safe. Every rise and fall of his chest was a reminder of the extraordinary courage that had saved 2 lives. Then came the moment Ruiz had been dreading yet anticipating, the check on Max's long-term recovery. The vet approached, face solemn but tinged with relief. "His injuries are severe, but he's a fighter. With rest and rehabilitation, he'll recover fully," she explained. Ruiz exhaled slowly, relief flooding through him. Max had endured the impossible, and now, after the night of blood, darkness, and terror, he had a chance at life again. He reached down, pressing a hand to Max's head. "You've earned every moment of it," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. The mother, sensing the fragile peace, spoke again. "I want to adopt him," she said, voice firm despite exhaustion. "He saved my baby. He belongs with us." Ruiz's eyes widened slightly, emotions crashing in a wave of gratitude, awe, and joy. Max, weak but alert, lifted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the offer, tail giving a tentative wag. For a moment, the trauma of the night seemed to fade, replaced by the promise of a home, safety, and recognition for his bravery. As arrangements were made for Max's adoption, Ruiz allowed himself to step back, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The night had been one of unimaginable chaos, a car wreck, a lurking predator, blood, darkness, and the courage of a dog willing to sacrifice everything for a human life. Every life saved that night, mother, baby, and dog, was a testament to resilience, loyalty, and the bond that transcends species. Yet, as the mother and baby were finally discharged, and Max rested comfortably, a subtle unease remained. Ruiz's instincts refused to ignore the lurking threat that had initiated the chaos, the predator that had driven the night's events. Somewhere beyond the forest, eyes still watched, patient and calculating. The world had celebrated Max as a hero, yet the shadows reminded him that danger often lingers, and courage must always be ready to rise again. Despite the lingering tension, hope began to bloom. Max, bandaged and weary, rested in the mother's arms during the ride home. The baby slept quietly against her chest, the mother's grip firm and protective. Ruiz followed in his cruiser, a silent guardian ensuring the safe passage of the family that had survived a night that should have claimed them. Every street, every turn felt surreal. This was a return to life after surviving the edge of death. When they arrived at the home, the baby's cries resumed softly, now mingled with the warmth of safety. Max was gently placed on the floor, wobbly but determined to stand. The mother knelt beside him, whispering soft praises, tears streaming down her cheeks. The dog gave a faint, tired bark, tail wagging weakly, eyes soft and alert. Ruiz watched silently, chest tight with emotion. Max had been a hero through blood and terror, and now, at last, he could experience peace. As night approached, the home settled into quiet, a fragile calm after a night of chaos. Max lay beside the baby's crib, head resting protectively near her small form. The mother sat in a chair, eyes heavy with sleep but filled with gratitude. Ruiz, watching the scene unfold, felt a profound sense of closure yet remained vigilant. The hero had survived, the baby was safe, and yet the shadows of the night still whispered their presence, a reminder that courage and vigilance often go hand in hand. Finally, as Ruiz prepared to leave, the mother turned to him. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. All of you saved our lives." Ruiz nodded, voice low but steady. "No," he replied. "Max saved your life. I was just lucky enough to be there." The dog lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting Ruiz's one last time, a silent understanding passing between them. The bond forged in blood, darkness, and courage had created a story none would forget. The family settled for the night, Max resting at the baby's side. Ruiz drove away, heart heavy but full, aware that the story of courage, loyalty, and survival would echo far beyond the walls of the hospital or the home. Somewhere in the darkness, the memory of the predator lingered, but in that quiet moment, life had prevailed. The hero of the night, battered yet unbroken, had fulfilled a destiny that few could comprehend. And though the forest remained, shadows deep and patient, the courage of one dog had proven that even in the darkest night, life, loyalty, and heroism could prevail. Max's journey, filled with peril, sacrifice, and bravery, had ended not in tragedy but in survival, love, and recognition, the dawn of heroes.